Were there any other crimes here that should have been prosecuted, especially in light of the new information that Congress is uncovering? Not information that they're getting from the administration, but information it looks like they were getting in large measure from a subpoena to Epstein's estate. So I'm not sure if the estate records match completely everything that the Justice Department has, or whether the estate had more information the Justice Department doesn't have. And the other big news is the release, or the efforts by Congress to release the Epstein files. You know, the media was pretending that it was all, that President Trump had something to hide. He really didn't. But Trump knew that the left was going to use any mention of his name against him. And what has happened is the material that has been released essentially has been devastating to the Democratic left, because Epstein had this terrible criminal record, and many key leftists in Obama's world, Clinton world, you name it, they for instance, we found out that we had a delegate, not a member of Congress, but a delegate who was texting with Epstein as she was sitting in a hearing trying to destroy Trump. So Epstein was actually working with the Democrats to try to destroy Trump. So that didn't work out well for them in terms of what the results of this disclosure would be. But just so you know, we have had at least two federal FOIA lawsuits. One against Justice Department and FBI, give us those Epstein files you said you were going to release, and one against the CIA. Now you would think, well, now all of that has been obviated by the transparency law that was signed by President Trump after being supported by all but one member of the House. And in the Senate, I haven't confirmed, but my understanding is from reports, they just let it go through almost instantaneously. They didn't even do a recorded vote. It was a voice vote, which means it just gets passed by acclamation, more or less. And I'm like, well, this is good. Maybe we'll get records that we otherwise wouldn't get. And then I went and looked at the bill. Now, the good news about the bill, it does require disclosure within a certain amount of time of the records that can be disclosed typically. The bad news about the bill, as I've jokingly mentioned, it's got loopholes big enough for a plane with Bill Clinton on it to fly to Epstein's Island. Gigantic loopholes to withhold information. So here we have the bill. Nicely pictured here. Not later than 30 days after the date of enactment of this act, the Attorney General shall, subject to subsection B, make publicly available in a searchable and downloadable format all unclassified records, documents, communications, and investigative materials in the possession of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation and United States Attorney's offices that relate to essentially Epstein, Maxwell, flight logs, the death of Epstein, basically how the case was handled. But I want to go back. I want you to see this again. What does it say? Subject to subsection B. Okay, the first alert you should be noting here is that all unclassified records, what's the mirror of that? You can withhold classified records. But it gets worse. And this is subsection B. So all the records subject to in compliance with subsection B, which has all of these not disclosure requirements, but secrecy protections. Records that contain personally identifiable information of victims or victims' personal and medical files and similar files for the disclosure of which would constitute a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. That depict or contain child sexual abuse materials as defined under law. I guess there's no objections to that. Would jeopardize an active federal investigation or ongoing prosecution. provided that such withholding is narrowly tailored and temporary, depict or contain images of death, physical abuse, or injury of any persons, contain information specifically authorized in the criteria established by the executive order to be kept secret in the interest of national defense or foreign policy, or in fact properly classified pursuant to such executive order. So they're not telling them to declassify information. They're saying if it's classified, you can keep it classified. Now, they do say that if they do redact material, they have to have justifications. And they encourage the Attorney General to declassify information to the maximum extent possible. So that's a long way of saying there's lots of opportunities to withhold information, especially since President Trump, for example, as in my view correctly directed the Justice Department to see were there any other crimes here that should have been prosecuted, especially in light of the new information that Congress is uncovering. Not information that they're getting from the administration, but information it looks like they were getting in large measure from a subpoena to Epstein's estate. So I'm not sure if the estate records match completely everything that the Justice Department has, or whether the estate had more information the Justice Department doesn't have. But if there's an ongoing criminal investigation, they're out for not releasing information. Now, does this mean that Judicial Watch is going to get all this information under FOIA? No. There's no enforcement mechanism here. There's no way to challenge these records under this law that are being withheld, the decisions to withhold records under law. The only way to do that is through FOIA. And that's why we have the Freedom of Information Act lawsuit for all these records. So our case isn't going to go away. In many ways, this law highlights the need for it. Now, there are all these questions about Epstein's connections to intelligence agencies. I don't know if all that's true, or I'm not prepared to kind of tell you it's all wet, or it's something that should be seriously, considered as true. But we do know there are questions. And so what we did was we asked the CIA for Epstein records. And we've gotten the proverbial hand to the face, so we're in federal court now about it. Those records, it looks like, won't be covered by this transparency law. What about records the State Department has? What about records the Treasury Department has? I mean, there are all these issues with J.P. Morgan, et cetera. So this is a good first step for transparency. I'm glad to see Congress take significant steps for transparency. This is the most significant transparency law passed in a long time. But there's more to be done, and Judicial Watch will do it. Well, actually is doing it. So the irony is, we filed this lawsuit for Epstein records. When did we file that lawsuit? You all remember in the back? It's got to be at least 6 months ago by now, right?
I think it was March.
Yeah, back in March or April. Not one record has been turned over to Judicial Watch. Not one record. Now, hopefully we get more records through this process. But if they're redacted, we still may have to challenge the redactions. We can't do it under this law, but we can do it under FOIA. So it's good we're getting more transparency, because it's clear the American people want it. How do I know it's clear? Every member of Congress voted for it. And I would suggest that it's also an indication that the American people really want accountability for the corruption here in Washington, D.C. They want the truth. They want full disclosure. And Epstein is kind of like, is not kind of like, is Exhibit A. The interest in getting those records out is Exhibit A. Because in this case, they see a person who engaged in terrible conduct seemingly getting a slap on the wrist. Many people think it was a slap on the wrist. Goes to jail, and he gets out after committing essentially sex crimes. And what happens? He's treated as if nothing happened by top Obama officials, etc. So the Epstein story ain't over yet, and even with this transparency law, it's only the beginning of the effort. And you know, we know this about everything government does. One disclosure order rarely is enough to get the full truth out. And your Judicial Watch, because of our expertise in FOIA, is as well positioned as anyone, including Congress, to get access to a lot of this information. So let's see if they start turning over records to us under FOIA. It's one thing, they don't even follow FOIA law, the agencies. I mean, when I say we had to sue to get records, what that means is, in this case specifically, the Justice Department and the FBI are not following FOIA law. The two agencies charged with enforcing the rule of law are violating it on the key matter of transparency for their own potential misconduct and areas of public interest that have significant, well, actually, areas of public interest that they promised to be more transparent on. So the Epstein transparency law is good, necessary, but not sufficient. And it's not all that it's cracked up to be. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.